So, Ben West, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, today I think is going to be one of the more important conversations I've had on this podcast so far because both your story, but also what you've gone on to do and how you're changing an entire narrative is really remarkable. But your story starts in quite an unremarkable place, right? So, talk to me about that unremarkable upbringing. What was it like growing up?
Yeah, growing up, I was born in Kent, which is south of London. It's known as the Garden of England. It's very green. I'm actually there right now. I'm looking out over a field. It's all very green and very wild. And so I guess my upbringing was exactly that. Like I was a kid, one of three brothers with my family, all very, very close, living this I'm going to use this word. It's like a feral life. You know, you just go running in the fields and you go outside and I spent most of my childhood outside with my friends, with my brothers. And that brings you very, very close to those people in your family. But you're absolutely right. It was so unremarkable. Apart from the odd broken bone that we that we all suffered, it was a pretty unremarkable time, in this beautiful part of the Kent countryside running around having the time of our lives for most of my childhood. And then obviously, as I'm sure we'll get into, things started to change when we got into my adolescence and my teenage years. But yeah, unremarkable. It was, I mean, I say unremarkable like it's a bad thing. It was awesome. I absolutely loved it. It was just like living with entire freedom for the first 10 years of my life. It was an amazing time.
And so, of course, our conversation today is going to be on the topic of mental health. And I think you say in your book, much like I share this experience, and I think most people can relate, that when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, mental health is this thing that you're kind of aware it's a thing, but it's almost this blind spot, right? We don't really know much about it. When did you first become aware of the potential impacts of mental ill health?
Wow. I mean, So, it was bounced around, this phrase, mental health. I don't know when the first time I heard it. It must have been when I was about 14, 15 years old. It was probably brought up one time at school. But I'd never really understood it properly. No one had ever really sat down and explained what that was or explained it in any depth or explained any of these mental illnesses or anything like that. Until my brother was diagnosed with clinical depression in September 2017 when he was 15 years old. And that was the first time anyone had actually very confrontationally gone, this is mental health. My mum sat me down, said, Sam has been diagnosed with clinical depression. And I was on the receiving end of that. And that was the first time it sort of infiltrated my life in any way. But I had absolutely no idea what that was. I could not for the life of me understand how you could be diagnosed with being sad, because for me, depression was, it was a emotion like sadness or like happiness or laughter. So I was like, how can you be diagnosed with clinical sadness? Like that doesn't make sense. And so I put absolutely no thought to it at all. No thought to it at all. Until January 21st, 2018, when Sam very, very unexpectedly took his own life. And that's when I realized the ball dropped and I was like, oh my God, this is an issue. Something I didn't even think was a real thing. Suddenly, it became obvious that not only was it real what he was going through, not only was it serious, it was actually he was when my mum told me that day, I had no idea that she told me that he had a fatal diagnosis. I didn't know that. I had no idea. But in reality, that's exactly what happened. But that was the Sam when Sam died. That was the moment I realised how significant this issue was.
And so, look, anyone who's listened to previous episodes of this podcast will know that, for example, my conversation with Patrick Foster, my conversation with Ben Pearson, I'm shit at this next part, right? Because I always try and cleverly ask questions, and there isn't any clever question to ask here. But I think it's important context for uh, kind of laying the foundations of what you've gone on to do since. So that date that you said, the 21st of January 2018, tell me a bit about that day.
Yeah. So basically this day, 21st January 2018, is the day Sam died. Will for the rest of my life be the absolute worst day of my life, without a single doubt in my mind. No, I can pretty much guarantee that nothing will ever happen to me that's that bad. It was awful, absolutely awful. And when you sort of tell people this, and suicide, it's a very difficult thing to imagine if you haven't experienced it yourself. When you tell people this story, a lot of people imagine the worst day of your life is obviously going to be I don't know, like apocalyptic and significant, and lots of things happen that are bad throughout the day, and it's going to almost have this atmosphere of something's going to happen wrong, like a horror movie building up to a bad moment. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was such a boring day. The only reason I remember that day is because of what happened. It was grey, it was drizzly, I did nothing, it was a Sunday. Um, I think I did some homework in the afternoon. I think it was physics homework. And it was just such a nothing day. There was no charged atmosphere really during the day. There was nothing like that. It was not some preemptive thing that something was going to happen. And then obviously, we had dinner. My dad went off to work, so he left and went to work on the train, and so it was just me, my mum, and my two brothers, and we had dinner. And Sam was just really withdrawn. He didn't want to talk. He wasn't talking. He was like face down, looking at his plate, pushing food around his plate. And I found that really annoying because partly because I'd had a great time with Sam growing up. Like we got on so well. He was so funny. He was always had so much energy. And throughout my childhood, that experience of being feral and wild and running in the field, Sam was running next to me. And it was usually him tripping me up and laughing at me, right? That was our relationship. And so when he started to change and when he was secluded and this moment in dinner when he was just feeling sad and didn't want to talk to us, I found that annoying because I felt like he'd sort of I'd lost that person that I used to really enjoy being around. He was not that same person anymore, and so I had an argument. I just lost it at him, and I got quite annoyed at how he was behaving at dinner. And then we all went upstairs, and my mum went to check on him just after 9 o'clock at night, and she opened the door, and just the screams, her screams just filled the entire house. That was, that noise rings through my mind all the time. It's a horrible memory. And then obviously I open the door and I find without a doubt one of the most horrific things anyone can ever see. And that is when my whole life suddenly got flipped around and put on its head and shaken up and shattered to pieces. But it was an unremarkable day, absolutely unremarkable day. Apart from that,
And we were speaking just before I hit record about that fact, right? Because I listened to your audiobook a few days ago on the drive here to Wales. And there I was driving down the M6. And as strange as this sounds, if I can make this reflection, it wasn't so much necessarily just the story of what you and your family had gone through that day that affected me. It was that context that you speak of, right? It was the fact that it was an ordinary day and an ordinary week and everything else was unremarkable, both before the fact, but also in the detail. It's actually quite remarkable writing after the fact, right? In how you detail exactly what happened for the hours afterwards. And so, I mean, much to the detriment of my drive, it quite emotionally struck me for perhaps the first time ever that this stuff happens to normal people in normal situations, in normal homes, in normal families, in quite a hidden way, right? It's silent in the fact that there were no real warning signs, and it's also silent in the fact that, you didn't know until after the fact, right? And how does that make you feel that you speak a lot about the statistics, right? 6,500 people each year take their own lives in the UK. How does it make you feel that that's almost hidden, right? There's this undercurrent that is so hard to detect, even up until the point where it happens. You just don't know.
yeah, you've absolutely struck the nail on the head there. So many people, when we talk about suicide and mental health issues, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, all of these things, most people have this opinion in their mind that it comes from a troubled upbringing, or it comes from trauma, or it comes from, this awful thing that's happened. And I made that conscious decision to title one of the chapters "A Normal Family" because there was no trauma, there was no abuse, there was nothing wrong. If you'd made a movie, it would be an incredibly boring start to that movie, right? And that's what I think some people don't find really hard to understand. You don't have to necessarily have a trigger to start this whole process. A lot of people don't understand that. So yeah, it was so normal, and that day was normal. You know, everyone again has this idea that, oh, someone takes their own life because they've had a really, really bad day or something really, really bad's happened. And it's like, actually, it was a very normal day, and Sam was very normal during the day. Normal for obviously how he was then, you know, yeah, but he was incredibly normal. Like there was no way I could have told you that that was going to happen that day. However, people sort of, we've got this thing where everyone says, oh, suicide is the silent killer. That silence is only allowed to exist by the fact that we don't have the tools to hear it, right? So that's the thing that I try and work on is like, yes, suicide's a silent killer, but it's only silent if you're not given the tools to actually listen to it. Because now I know what to look for. And now I know, and I've sort of tuned into the right frequency. They say it's a silent killer, then why can't I stop hearing it? It's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? And this is what I'm trying to do with my campaigning now is like, hold on. Yes, it's silent to most people, but that's only because they are not asking the right questions and they're not looking in the right places and they're not, you know, we say the statistics, you know, we're just not concentrating on the right things. And if we enable people to understand and to listen and to ask the right questions and to notice and to intervene. I guarantee you, if you get those tools, you will realize that actually nothing about suicide is silent. And actually, the entire experience of suicide from the moment they start struggling is screams. It screams with obvious signs. But the problem is, people aren't given the education, the tools to actually do that. But now I see that. I want to be able to enable those conversations and to sort of unenable the silence that gets put around it. But you mentioned the statistics. I think you know you can't read 6,500 and it's just awful. It's absolutely awful. And as someone that's been one of those statistics, you know, having to have dealt with just one, I can tell you the ripple effect that that one person has is just absolutely. It's just incalculable how far that goes, and the number of tears, man, and the trauma. Not just my family, but Sam's friends, my friends, his whole school. The ripples go so far. And so when you're in my position and you see, you know, 6,500, 6,000, or, you know, whatever the number is at the moment, you don't see it as at 6,500. I see it as hundreds of thousands of people that are affected by this, hundreds of thousands every single year. You know, if you scale it up, you're talking probably about 1 million people have been affected by suicide since Sam died. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. So yeah, it might be 6,000, but I can guarantee you that the impact is in the 6, 7 digits.
So I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of that answer because it was interesting to me, which is that, and it's true, right? There is this misconception that mental health is a symptom of something going wrong somewhere down the line, and this in and of itself causes almost this double-edged stigma. Double-edged in the sense that on the one hand, those who are suffering with a mental health issue feel as if they are somehow at fault or inadequate, and therefore that suppresses
Yeah.
any ability to talk about it. But also, I mean, I've had friends who have reflected on their conversation with other people who are suffering with a mental health issue as if, oh, that's to be avoided. We can't talk about that because I don't want to delve into this person's backstory, as if there's always a backstory there, right? How do we remove this stigma before we even go into actually having one-on-one conversations, just accepting that this is, in the same way that any other illness comes about, a thing that happens to you and not something that is a marker that you are in some way broken?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, so many people expect there to be a lot of triggers. And actually, you know what? I think this expectation that mental illness has to come from something, I think makes people that are struggling, and I can't talk to this, you know, I haven't struggled, I don't know what it is, but I can reflect on the conversations I've had. And I think actually what it does is creates this, and you hit it right, you hit it so well just there, is this inadequacy as a person, as yourself. Because if you can't locate a trigger or the cause for your suffering, then the only trigger and cause you can identify is that you are broken as a human being. And that just opens the floodgates on some incredibly difficult emotions like guilt and shame and all this awful stuff, um, and self-esteem and all of that. So yeah, I think we need to move away from that. You know, what I've tried to break it down in the book actually is talk about the brain chemistry behind it. You know, in the same way that, you know, you can have so many issues with the organs of your body. You can have a very slight difference in the percentage of neurotransmitters being released, or an inhibition to release serotonin, or a slightly higher number of enzymes that break down serotonin, and that can create so much trigger. And as soon as you can sort of understand that, actually, no, I'm not broken as a human being. I've just got exactly like a kidney that's not working, is not able to perform its job efficiently. In a lot of cases with people with mental illnesses, they just have a brain that is maybe just struggling to produce the right number of neurotransmitters, to inhibit the right number of neurotransmitters, and that's it. Chemicals. I find the brain absolutely fascinating. How all of our experiences, our entire outlook on the world, can really be drawn back to a chemical that's released. It is fascinating. But it's such a good point. There's nothing wrong with you as a person for struggling. And actually, I'm a huge believer in we as people, and I'm sure we'll get onto sort of what I've learned through this journey later, but I'm a huge believer in the fact that we as people are shaped not necessarily by our successes, but by our hardship. If you're successful your whole life, you're not going to be a very, you're not going to have grown at all as a person. We're shaped by what we go through. And if you go through mental illness, if you go through struggles in your life, you are one hell of a person. You are an incredibly brave, strong person to have gone through that. And a lot of the time, mental illness makes you feel shame, makes you feel alone, makes you feel broken, makes you feel weak. A lot of people label people that are struggling as weak. That could not be further from the case. Everyone I've met, regardless of how well they're coping, they've been absolutely incredible individuals and have inspired me so much, because you are defined by your hardship and how you cope with that. And if you are still here, having had a mental health issue, then yeah, that's an incredible marker as you as a person.
I had a epiphany whilst brushing my teeth this morning and listening to part of your audiobook.
Do.
Not to turn this into self therapy for a moment, but it was quite profound actually, because I look back at so I'm 26 now. I look back at when I was like 20, 21, and we as a family were going through some difficulties. My dad had some fairly significant but so far undiagnosed health issues. It was an incredibly stressful environment. Lots was going wrong, and I was young, right? As in, I look back now and I thought I was a big adult then. I was definitely not. And there was a good like 6 month period, and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't plot this on a spectrum of it was a mental health illness, because frankly it wasn't. However, there was a good 6 month period where for like no logical reason I would just sometimes stay in bed all day, and I would constantly like eat shit and not go outdoors, and when I do nights out I drink far too much, and I just wouldn't be productive. And because of that stigma that we just spoke about, the only conclusion I could come to is I'm just a shit person. Like, this is all just my fucking fault. Like, I am just being weak. And so to imagine that, but
Yeah.
magnified with somebody who is actually going through a prolonged illness, is actually just quite scary, right? Because we're taught to blame ourselves and not talk about it.
Yeah, and laziness. Everyone labels that as laziness. Like, come on, it's not. That's not lazy. You're struggling. You don't go to the intensive care ward in a hospital and go, look at all these lazy people lying down. You don't do that. It's the same as if you plugged yourself into chemo because you've got massive cancer. You would not feel guilty about the fact that you're not going for a half marathon run. It's exactly the same thing. People have our internal conversations are so negative, and when it comes to mental health, because of the symptoms of what you're going through, even very minor things like a breakup or exhaustion, it automatically makes your brain focus on negative things, and that negative thing for a lot of the time is focusing on yourself, and so you start calling yourself lazy and all of this stuff. And you know what that does? It spirals it down, because if you're having a hard day and you lie in bed all day, and then you feel guilty for not doing something, and you feel shame for doing that, and then you think you're an inadequate person, guess what that's going to do? It's going to make you feel worse, and you're just going to lie in bed and feel sorry for yourself, and feel even worse. That is absolutely untrue. And I always think, if the only reason you should feel guilt or shame in life is if you've hurt someone and you've done something wrong, and if you're in bed because you've had a bad day, I always ask myself this when I feel feelings of guilt or shame coming on. I always go, have I hurt anyone? No. So that's a misplaced guilt, and it's a misplaced shame, because you haven't hurt anyone. And the guilt you're feeling is a guilt based on some expectation of you to be constantly doing, or constantly, trying to be the best self and all this motivational stuff you see, that's a misplaced guilt. And I would encourage everyone actually, and we talk about guilt and shame in the book because it's something I really faced, especially given the argument I had with my brother just before he died. That was crippling guilt and shame. That was absolutely horrendous. But if you haven't hurt anyone and you haven't done anything wrong, then you don't deserve to feel guilty or shameful because you haven't done anything wrong. And so often you can interrupt that thought by going, okay, I feel guilty for lying in bed. Who have I hurt? What have I done wrong? Oh, nothing. Okay. And then you can sort of readjust your moral compass or your sort of mental health compass to calibrate it a little bit, because we're so quick to be so self-critical, especially when it comes to mental health. And actually, if you need a day in bed, your brain has existed for millions of years, not personally, but like our brains. They've existed for millions and millions of years. They've done a really, really good job at keeping us alive, and not just keeping us alive, but thriving in this world. It knows what it's doing, and if it wants to give you a day in bed, it knows like really well that you deserve a day in bed and you need to rest. Um, so listen to that. Don't feel guilty for it. But I know how easy it is to do that because I do that quite a lot.
So I want to go on to that phrase, guilt and shame, actually, because, like you say, it's something you speak about in the book. And I was listening a few days back to your conversation with Jamie Lang, and you speak about it in that conversation as well, how you took that feeling of guilt and shame that you felt, and used it for like really massive good. So talk to me about that crossroads, right? You're coming to terms with the death of your brother, and you have this realization that you need to be the person to do something.
Yeah, this is such a difficult one because there were so many reasons that I started campaigning. And I could very much pretend to be the hero here and be like, oh, I wanted to save all these people. And look, I absolutely love being able to help. I do. I've always been like that. I've always had huge amounts of empathy for people. I've always tried to help people that are going through hard times. I've just always been like that. But I that's not the reason I did this. And it seems really weird, but the only reason I wanted to help people was because I was desperate to do something positive, and I was desperate to do something for myself. It was a very selfish decision to start campaigning and do all this. Right, it was so selfish, and not in a bad way. Selfish gets a really bad rep, but actually being selfish sometimes is a good thing. So I started it because this guilt and shame. I know I was at this point in time. Imagine I've just lost my brother. A couple of weeks later, I sort of remembered the last conversation I had with him while he was alive. I remember that I had a go at him. The last thing I ever said to him while he was alive was "fuck off." So I was there, just intoxicated by grief, guilt, and shame. Absolutely intoxicated by the idea that I was the person that had killed him. I genuinely believed that. And so everyone around me, everyone that was coming to my house and giving us flowers and crying, and all the people at school that were crying, like every time I saw that, although I didn't show it on the outside, internally, the messages I was sending myself were horrific, horrific, because I genuinely believe that I'd caused all this. And it was awful, absolutely awful. And so for me, there were lots of reasons why I wanted to start campaigning. One, I needed something positive to do that wasn't what I call like ceremonial grief, ceremonial sadness. I just didn't want to be sad anymore. I want to do something positive. But also, I just wanted to do something that showed me that actually I was doing something good, and I wasn't such a bad person. I almost felt like I owed a debt to the world, to do something good. And obviously, I've got to a point now where I can understand that and I can reflect. And I've been through a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy to like I said, recalibrate that internal compass to understand that actually that was misplaced guilt because I hadn't done anything wrong. Because that is an argument that anyone could have with anyone at any time, any moment of the day. And so it's taken a long time to get to that point. But now, obviously, in the mental health space, it's absolutely fueled by this idea that I really believe that this is a very solvable issue. And I think there's so much progress we can make here to really have impact with millions of people's lives every year. And the idea of being able to help that many people, even though I couldn't help my brother and we couldn't go back and help him, that excites me so, so much because, yeah, no one deserves to go through what Sam went through, and certainly no one deserves to go through what I went through. It was absolutely horrific. And so the campaigning now is, let's do my best. If I could have a legacy for my life, then I'd love to be able to help stop that from happening to someone else, and give them the life that my brother wasn't able to have.
Um, and so just a bit of a departure because this just popped into my mind actually at that crossroads when you kind of went from being in the middle of this situation to putting yourself out there to be in the middle of other people's situations, for want of a better phrase. You gave a talk to your school, didn't you? And the messages that were coming in switched from "I'm so sorry for what you've gone through" to "Here's what I'm going through." I guess two-pronged question, thinking out loud here because I didn't plan to ask this. Firstly, just tell me about that, like when you saw this tidal wave and realized that this was a real thing. But then secondly, does that continue to this day, right? You're on a platform now where people know that you're the guy who's enacting change. Does the pressure become a lot? Do you have an expectation from others, rightly or wrongly, where people can open up to you and, there's this kind of never-ending DM requests of issues?
Yeah, so absolutely, you're so right. So I mean, the message I was receiving when anyone loses someone, the message you'll all receive is really sorry to hear what's happened. Let me know if you need any help. And I did this talk to school, and it was absolutely incredible how quickly those messages changed and became, I'm not okay, I need help. And the number of people at my school that told me about diagnoses they had and the fact what they were going through, I stood back and I was like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely shocking. And that was sort of when I realized I could help and do something good. Um, and but yeah, I do get a lot of this, and it was very difficult at the time because it was quite scary. And it's not something I've really spoken about before, but like friends of mine were going through some really hard times that I didn't know about. And when you go through trauma or grief, your brain becomes hyper aware of the danger of of having to be going through something similar again. And so when a lot of these people were telling me stuff like this, actually the main emotion that came out for me was actually like terror. I was really, really scared that I was going to have to do it again with a friend. And I said this to someone actually back in the day. I was like, I can't do this again. When someone I knew was like, was talking about like how they'd been suicidal, I went to a friend. I was like, seriously, I'm not going to survive doing this again. And so I guess there were like I said, there were lots of reasons for starting this, but it was like, I wanted to not I wanted to protect myself. I wanted them to get the help they needed, so I didn't have to go through it again. Because I don't think I would have survived going through that again, knowing how hard it was. For one time, it was absolutely awful. But in terms of what I get now, yeah, loads, absolutely loads. And on the face of it, people would like because I get DMs that are oh like 500 words long, absolute like whole books in my DMs. And a lot of people might hear that and go, "Oh, that must be such a burden," blah 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 blah. But and yes, it's a lot to have to deal with, and it's a lot to have to read. But you know, in my job, you don't get performance. You don't get like performance reviews at the end of this end of the quarter. You don't get anything to tell you're doing a good job, especially when you're not necessarily enacting governmental change. If it hasn't happened, you could very easily be like, oh, well, we're not doing anything. To look at DMs of people that are pouring their absolute heart and soul out to you and being incredibly vulnerable and incredibly brave, that's sort of how I look at my performance review in a weird way. Because let's face it, I wouldn't be able to do any of what I did if I didn't listen to people. And I've made it an absolute priority for me to just open my ears, listen to what's going on. And I was at a book fair the other day, and a group of mental health nurses came over to me, and we had a really really long chat about the pressures in the mental health service, and it was a really deep chat about that. And then in the same 10 minutes, the next person that came up was someone that's been in a mental health unit for a year and a half, has been deeply, deeply suicidal, has extreme amount of problems that he's had to face, and was telling this like I had like I'd known him my entire life, and I was a deep, deep trusted friend, and I absolutely love the idea that someone has enough trust in me to tell me stuff that they probably haven't told anyone else in their life, you know. And if I can try and I'm not going to say I reply to everyone. I don't. I'm not in a position where I can offer clinical support, and I don't think it's ethical for me to reply. But I do love the fact that people feel able to do that, and that shapes everything I do. It shapes all the conversations I have. It shapes my knowledge of this subject. It shapes I'm going to Parliament next week. It's definitely going to shape everything I'm saying there. And that is an amazing thing, because there is very little, there are very few feelings in life like the satisfaction you get when you can make someone feel a bit better or give someone a bit of hope when they have none. Like, a lot of people in life, especially nowadays, are driven by money and success and fame. Like, if I can make someone feel better, or give them some hope and give them a few extra days just to get through what they're going through. Yeah, there was absolutely there was no greater feeling than that. And people, one of the most common questions I get asked in podcasts actually is, what's been the best moment for you? And everyone always thinks it's some lights, camera, action, standing in ITV studios with Prince William and all this stuff. I was like, oh, it must have been so amazing. And yeah, that was really cool. But by far the best moment for me in the last 4 years hasn't been anything anyone's seen. It is a private moment to myself where I just can't stop myself from smiling because I've actually been able to help someone. Um, I can't describe that feeling. It's just an incredible feeling, especially coming from where this has come from. Um, it's uh, it's satisfaction like I will never ever experience in anything else in my life. And that's what drives me now. It's and if I can have those conversations with people, then bring it on. I absolutely love the fact that people feel comfortable saying that to me.
So this is an interesting connection to something you speak about a lot, which is, of course, the importance of conversations. But you make a point that seems obvious once you've said it, but ironically isn't spoken about enough, which is this idea that mental health awareness periods roll around and everyone says, right, guys, we just need to speak some more, as if that's like the easiest and most natural thing for somebody who's going through a struggle already with all of the pressures that
Yeah.
we just spoken about, to just be like, yeah, okay, a hashtag has told me I'm going to talk, so now I'm going to talk. So that's evidently not the answer. There is an onus on all of us to create these conversations, right? So I'm sure everyone listening wants to create those conversations, to have those moments where they feel like they can help a friend or a family member. How do we go about doing it?
Yeah, this is such a good point, because the narrative has been, oh, just talk about it, just talk about your mental health, talk about your mental health everywhere. And I'm like, Mate, if you start actually listening to people and asking the right questions, you realize that the telling people to talk is just totally the opposite of what we need to be saying in this narrative. You know, telling someone that cannot get themselves out of bed to go to work because of their mania and their panic attacks, telling them to simply talk about it is like telling a heart disease patient to eat their five a day. It's like, okay, that's great, thank you, I'll take that on board, but it's not actually going to help. But what the difference is, and the different narrative that I want to push is, don't stop telling everyone to talk, and teach people how to listen and to ask those questions. Because listening is, it's crazy, isn't it, that we listen every single day to conversations and to people, but we never really listen. um, we the very subtle difference between active listening, which is when you're really engaged in what that person's saying, and normal conversational listening, is in conversation. Often we're not listening to the words people are using to talk to us. We're actually waiting for them to finish their sentence so we can add our bit. So you're not waiting to hear what they're saying. You're actually waiting for the moment you can give your opinion on something. So you sort of listen to their conversation or what they're saying to you for context and for what they're talking about, and then you're just waiting for where it's wrapping up. And I'm the worst for this. I'm the worst for finishing people's sentences because I'm waiting for a little slow down their phrase so I can jump in and finish it off. And it's just, with that's how we've been wired in conversation. But active listening, really letting someone talk and listening to every single word and analyzing it and listening very, very carefully to them. It's a skill that's very, very easy to learn, and it's a skill that is exceptionally easy to engage with. Because all it really is asking an open-ended question. How does how does losing your job make you feel? Or, open-ended questions like, what would you do if you could wave a magic wand and make everything okay right now? What would change? So, open-ended questions, and then sit there and listen. Just listen to every single word they say. It's an incredibly important skill. But let's stop telling people to talk and start telling people to listen and teaching people to listen. And also, I'm of the opinion that the people struggling with their mental health should be the last people to talk, because everyone's always like, let's normalize mental health, let's normalize mental health. And then the entire room goes silent, waiting for the person that's struggling to talk first. And you're like, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. If we want to normalize mental health and get people talking, then the people that aren't struggling need to be talking. You know, I need to be talking. If you've had a bad day, tell people. If you're going for a breakup, be honest about it. And that's how we normalize this. It's us talking, because exactly like I found, vulnerability is infectious. So if you can stand in front of the whole school like I did and be so vulnerable and cry and do all this stuff, and I have no idea how I managed to do that in that mindset, but I did, you'll find that everyone looks at you as a safe person. And I've got it now. Me talking about my mental health and mental health in general on social media, the stuff that people feel able to share, not even anonymously, it's absolutely incredible. And if we can put that into society and get vulnerability everywhere, and CEOs need to stop investing money into mental health first aiders and all of this stuff and all of this stuff, and focus actually on, if you're a CEO that goes out and goes, this is my story. These are my struggles. I have depression. I've done this. This is my experience with grief. Oh my goodness, you will see a culture change in that workplace immediately. And this is the thing that people don't understand. They go, let's talk about mental health, and then everyone goes quiet. And we're not going to change anything doing that. But obviously, it ties back to what I'm doing. And you can't say, let's all listen and not have some sort of education in how to do that, which is why I think it needs to be absolutely ingrained into education at schools.
So I kind of learned this indirectly a few months back. I read a book by somebody called Jessica Pan called Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come. And it's this idea of this, she's an introvert and she wants to become more extroverted. And so she went through this year-long journey of putting herself through crazy experiences to just force the issue right. And I felt like I kind of trod the line somewhere between the two. So I thought, I'm going to read this book, see what I take from it. And the biggest lesson I took from it is that the importance of self-disclosure. The idea that it's all well and good waiting for people to come and tell you something or have a conversation, but the second you're even 10% more vulnerable than you'd usually be in a conversation, whether or not you suspect something's wrong with somebody, I thought that mechanism would give me like some small talk on the bus, but like it has literally changed the fundamental level of conversations I have with everybody. And that's why in a way this conversation is so timely and apt, because I didn't realize the scale of what's going on with mental health until I started subtly encouraging these conversations, and everybody has a bloody story. So if somebody wants to be better at being a conversationalist that facilitates these conversations and makes somebody feel comfortable, or maybe you suspect that a friend or family member wants a conversation, what are some good openers to kind of tease it open and see if it's something that they're ready to speak about?
Yeah, it's so hard, It's really, really. This is the first thing I'll say is people get very scared of doing this because it's a very hard thing to do, and it is hard. Like approaching someone, having that conversation, knowing someone's struggling, and talking to them is an exceptionally hard thing to do. And getting to that point, a lot of people beat themselves up for not being able to do that, or not being able to ask the right question, or not knowing what to do. Like, don't give yourself a break, because it is incredibly hard to do that, and it takes a huge amount of strength and bravery and courage to do that. But it's really important to do. And so some of the things I'd say is, I don't actually have a mug with me, but I have this thing called cup of tea 1, 2, 3. If you want to have an honest conversation with someone, get a mug of tea in their hands, okay? Because as soon as you have a mug of tea or a mug of coffee or a mug of hot chocolate or something in your, it could even be a glass of water. Having something in your hands, it's a really weird psychological thing that you feel a little bit safer doing this. So get them over, have a cup of tea, have a mug of coffee, whatever. And and then comes the 1, 2, 3. Count to three, and I think just go in. Say 1, 2, 3, not out loud in your head. Count yourself in and go, I've noticed this. I really wanted to talk to you about it. Um, what's been going on, or another way of phrasing it is there anything you want to get off your chest? And then maybe they'll want to share, and that's great. And if they sort of feel reluctant, then maybe you can talk about it. Like, maybe you can be vulnerable. Like, I was going through this difficult thing as well, and it's always good to talk, blah blah blah, and be vulnerable yourself. But it's hard. It's really, really hard. And there's loads of resources online about this. And there's obviously my book, which talks a lot about it as well, and gives a lot of openers and different things you can do. But I would say for people, like, it's not an easy thing to do. It really, really isn't. Look, I didn't do it when I needed to. And that's exactly so I can empathize with people that are in that position. But cup of tea, 1, 2, 3. Tea is like honesty juice. It just makes people feel at ease and relaxed. But the biggest thing is just make yourself into a safe person. If you were approaching you to have a conversation about the worst part of your life, what would make you feel more comfortable talking to you? You're not going to want to talk to you if you feel like there's a coldness to it. Be warm, be vulnerable, and try and make yourself safe and inviting. And then I guarantee you ask the right questions, ask open-ended questions, and you will make progress and you will hear them. And also, I would just say people are put off by this because there's some expectation to fix everything, right? If you approach someone to talk about their mental health, you are not expected to give them advice. In fact, I think most people struggling with their mental health are not looking to go to a friend for advice, because a great way of looking at it is the person that's struggling is the expert of their situation. You aren't. You have no idea. You're learning about their situation. They're the experts. So your job is not to give them advice of this is what you should do, or this is the person you should talk to, or you should go and talk to this helpline, or this is go for a run, do this, blah blah blah. Don't tell them what to do. Let them discover what to do by being a sounding board and not giving advice, but exploring how they're feeling and what they think they should do. Maybe it gets to a point in the conversation where you're like, so what do you think the next steps are? Or, in a perfect world, what would happen next? Those sorts of questions, let them do it. And I think that takes a huge amount of pressure off people because let's face it, it's terrifying. I've spoken to a PT in a gym who had a client disclose they were suffering with body dysmorphia, and he was like, "What do I do? I don't know what to say to this person. I've got absolutely no idea." And I said, it's not about what you say to them. It's about how you make them feel, and how much you can learn and give them a safe space to talk about it. But it's difficult, and I do empathise with that. It's very, 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 very difficult because you just constantly think you're the wrong person to be doing it. But if they've come to you, or if you're a family friend, or someone that's close to them, you're absolutely the right person to do it. And the sooner they are able to talk about it, the sooner they can come up with their next steps. And those next steps might be going to the doctor, going to therapy, speaking to someone else. It's a very, very important intervention to make. And the beautiful thing about it is every single one of us can be that intervention. And I think that's an incredible thing.
You have a rule of thumb, don't you, that if you think that something is up with somebody, assume you're the only person who feels that way. Assume you're the only person who has spotted a sign, and don't outsource that responsibility to somebody else. That seems quite powerful.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's like this whole fear thing. And often when we're like, oh, you don't really want to do it because it's quite scary, you'll go, oh, someone else do it. Or you go, I'm not that close with them, someone else will do it. Uh, it's difficult because obviously if you're not in a close enough relationship that would be acceptable and they'd feel safe, then it's not going to be a very helpful conversation. But I always have a rule of thumb. In the same way, if you're walking down the street and someone was having a stroke, or someone had fallen over and was unconscious, you wouldn't be like, but I don't know them. I'm not going to ask. You'd assume you're the only person that sees that they are unconscious on the pavement, and you'd go over and check that they're okay. Exactly the same thing I think occurs in mental health. If you see someone that's having a breakdown or obviously having a difficult time, or not wanting to do with the things they're doing, or showing any signs that they are not happy, treat it like you would an unconscious person on the pavement. Just go and have that conversation. And genuinely, if you can do that and ingrain that into your life, you become such an incredible Samaritan and such an incredible gift to this society and to our world. And it's a very easy thing to do because all you're doing is looking out, intervening, and you don't need fancy training and fancy certificates to do this. You just need to be a caring person who makes someone feel safe and offers an ear, and allows them to feel a little bit more control in a difficult moment. And I just repeat it. Like, I think it's a beautiful thing that every single one of us has the power to do that. But yeah, you wouldn't ignore the unconscious person because they were some distant relative. Like, you'd go and check. And I think it's exactly the same thing here.
I was just frantically Googling as you were talking there, because if there's one thing I'm great at on this podcast, it is butchering citations and referring to studies kind of in a half-assed way.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to find the name of it. When you were speaking about the analogy of passing somebody injured in the street, right, there's this famous study from, I believe, New York. a few years back now where somebody was being murdered on a street, and then the police did this investigation, and they heard that within earshot of this person calling for help, there was something like 26 people who heard and could have helped but didn't, right? And so the phenomenon is called the bystander effect. And the antidote to this, we're told, is if you're in a physical situation in public, you should point to a singular person and say, I need you to help and do this. We can almost invert that with what you're saying here, which is you have to assume that you are the person who is being told it is you if you suspect something, right?
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree with that. I think, yeah, it is the bystander effect. All of this is because you're like, oh, someone else did it, someone else did it. And I think as long if you can understand the responsibility that you have and the position that you have, then that's a powerful thing. But obviously, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to do that. But yeah, absolutely. I think being able to recognize that responsibility, but also, especially when it comes to mental health, unlike a person calling for help on the pavement, not many people will notice that there's something bad going on. Even if someone is very obviously highly emotional, a lot of people will just brush over it and ignore it. Not because they are ignoring it per se, they just don't think it's a reason to be concerned. If you are the one that notices that maybe this is something to investigate, I'd say you're probably in the minority in a lot of cases. So there we go. There's the responsibility. I just think if you're ever questioning whether someone is okay, I just think why not ask? Because they could turn around and be like, oh, it's actually fine. I'm just feeling really emotional this morning. I don't know what it is. Train was late. Had a really bad morning. Blah blah blah. Could be that, or they could just be diagnosed, or they could have just lost their granddad, or they could have lost their mom or something. Just ask. I think that's an incredible thing to do. But you're absolutely right. Being able to recognize that responsibility and that position, and obviously, to sort of add to this, I think being self-aware in this situation is really important as well, and knowing when you can help. Because unlike asking someone unconscious on the street whether they're okay, having these conversations can be quite a big burden to have to, and a lot of weight to carry. And you've got to look after yourself as well, which is really important. But I do think if we're really serious about tackling mental health and mental health issues and stopping people from getting to a point of suicide, intervention, 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 and that goes for schools, that goes for the NHS, and that goes for every single person out there. We can all be tools in early intervention. It's not just some NHS department. It is every single one of us, and that's the responsibility we have going forward. And I think that's actually an incredibly powerful position to hold if you can recognise that. So that's what I encourage people to do: is just ask, just ask.
So another part of this puzzle is the stigma and the cultural norms, and we were speaking just before we started recording about this Daily Mail piece, which I think you haven't seen, but it's been doing the rounds on Twitter. So I'm just going to pull it up and read you the headline and a little quote from it, right? So the headline is, UK builders go woke in capital letters. Study finds 3/4 of tradesmen discuss their feelings with colleagues, as if this is a crazy revelation. And then it says, quote, modern tradesmen are sensitive souls, more likely to enjoy yoga, muesli, listening to Radio 4, and sharing their feelings, a survey has found. Now, you're out here trying to encourage these conversations, including those between young men who are disproportionately more likely to die by suicide in an industry such as builders, which leaves them even more pre-exposed to die by suicide. And then we've got a major newspaper calling that phenomenon woke and comparing it to eating muesli. When you're doing all that you do, and that comes out 2 days ago, how does that make you feel?
Okay, I'm mixed emotions to this. I think what they're trying to insinuate is really damaging. But you take letter by letter what they're actually saying in that headline. How amazing is that? That builders feel comfortable doing that. So it's such a badly stigmatized area that in the past has been the worst for mental health discussions. I've worked with people that have gone into construction companies and tried to speak to builders about this stuff. It is like taking a splinter out. It's really, really difficult to get through. So on the surface, I'm like, brilliant. That is really, really good progress. And it's always nice to see that there is progress happening here. The fact that it tries to insinuate it as a bad thing, because that's what they're doing, right? There's a very conscious thing they're doing to try and make it look like, oh, builders are going soft or whatever. That's really damaging. And it's really difficult when you make so much progress and people like this are making articles and putting things into the media or saying things on socials that just tear everything down. and just reignite this stigma. Because you know what? How many builders are going to get the response from that article and be like, oh, maybe I am getting a bit soft, whatever that means. It's just so bad. But you know what? You know what really annoys me is the same paper will absolutely rejoice at any mental health activist like myself, and they have in the past written article incredibly endorsing articles of me and my work, and then they'll go and do this. It's double standards, and it has no place in society. Absolutely no place in society. And I do think there should be so much more heavy regulation of what is allowed to be published and not and isn't. I think anything that's like this is just so damaging. If you printed your paper on carcinogenic paper that caused cancer, you would be in a lot of trouble. But if you're printing the words on that paper that is contributing to illness and contributing to death and contributing to a stigma, then why the hell are you not facing the same repercussions? Because the actual impact in terms of death, I think, is probably similar to printing on carcinogenic paper. But because it's mental health, suddenly we don't understand it, and suddenly it's not a problem. If you're actually causing risk to someone's life or contributing to a risk to someone's life, you have a responsibility to be stopped and to have that regulated. So that's my mind on that article. But I do think actually fantastic, absolutely fantastic that builders are talking about it, being emotional, because that is so great. Because let's face it, when you think of a man, it's a builder man, isn't it? It's builders. They are the epitome of manly men, scaffolders, and all this. I still get my voice changes when I go to like the garage or when builders are around. It's just so weird, isn't it? You almost feel like just a weird atmosphere in the presence of them. Um, but so to see that there is change within that industry, I think is a fantastic thing. Also, muesli is really nice, so I don't see the problem with muesli at all. I love a muesli.
Something else that was encouraging in that piece, I'll be honest, it's been a few years since I've read Daily Mail comments, although I know that Daily Mail comments are normally terrible and it is just the worst takes ever, constantly copy and pasted 400 times over. But I read the comments of that this morning whilst considering this conversation. And even those who live in the Daily Mail comments are all disagreeing with the stance of that take. So if that isn't a signifier that there is a cultural understanding here that,
Mm.
there is a conversation to be had here and it's not this one. I've never felt more reassured by Daily Mail comments in my life.
That's really good as well. See, this is the thing, and I'm really conscious of this as well within the mental health spaces. It's very, very easy to get drawn into oh, everything's shit, it's all bad, it's all bad, it's all bad. There's some really good progress happening. And this is what I really get quite excited about. Like in my job, people say, "Oh, how do you even cope with reading all this stuff and hearing all these stories all the time?" I wouldn't. I don't think I would if there wasn't an equal dose of hope and happiness and happy stories. There are some really, really positive things happening. I'm involved in a few things that are happening at the moment that are hugely positive and going to have massive impacts on people's lives. I said this earlier. I truly think the mental health emergency and the mental health crisis we're in at the moment is an incredibly solvable issue. It's incredibly solvable, and I don't think it's going to take like a huge amount of well, that's a lie, it's going to take a huge amount of work, but the work is beginning, right? It's not going to take some monumental discovery. It is small things, little small introductions that we can make that are going to change the landscape of this. I don't think if we do the right things now, I don't think in when I'm dead, I don't think we'll be discussing the mental health crisis. I think it will be an issue, certainly. I don't think it will be an emergency or a crisis to the level we're seeing at the moment. I think that that's a possibility. I think we can get to that level. And hey, I'm going to try my best to get us to that level, a lot as well as the hundreds, thousands, millions of other advocates and charity people that are nurses and mental health workers that are trying to do the same. I think it's really solvable, really, really solvable. And I do think there's a lot of hope here. And seeing stuff like this, the progress that we're making, people having conversations, industries that wouldn't necessarily be talking about this stuff, taking it full first head on and having that just shows you how much progress we're making. And that's something to be excited about. It's something to be hopeful about. And yeah, it's like almost a peg in the sand. We sort of a way of measuring how far we've come because builders, even a few years ago, you wouldn't have seen a similar statistic or people backing it up in the Daily Mail. So I love that. I absolutely love that, and it's one of those things that gives you that dose of hope that we all need sometimes.
Now, of course, as we've spoken about, conversations can be effective, societal changes are important. But what role does government have to play here? I know that lots of your campaigning has involved MPs and prime ministers and wider government. What can the government be doing better right now to help us overcome this mental health crisis?
Yeah, I mean, look, it'll be very, very easy for me to sit here and say all sorts of things about what they are and aren't doing. Um, I think what needs to happen is very, very clear to me. I think if you are in contact with children under the age of 18, I think as an absolute matter of standard, you should be mental health first aid trained. You know, I think that should absolutely be a safeguarding issue. I'm still bewildered at the fact that no one's bringing this up, and I seem to be the only person talking about it because it seems absolutely absurd that you are allowed to teach a child and not understand mental health. I think that's absurd. You know, in the government, so last September, the government made a new statutory requirement for all key stage education PSHE lessons to include mental health education. Whoop, that's really good, actually, really, really good progress on that. But in their supporting guidance for that new law, they gave the reasons that they thought this across the board mental health education, right the way from primary school all the way to end of secondary school. They gave their opinion on why that's important. And one of their points, and I talk about this in the book, one of their points was to enable children and young adults to recognize mental health issues in their peers and friends and have the conversations that are necessary to get help. And I'm sitting there being like, hold on, you've changed the law to teach students about mental health because you recognize it's a really important thing for them to know about. But teachers, no, they can be left to work out themselves. You're like, so what a double standard. Come on. Why do teachers not need the same thing? If anyone needs to be better prepared to have those conversations, in my opinion, it is not children. It is the people that are literally assigned to protect their well-being. You know, above most things, teachers' job is safeguarding and well-being and creating functioning adults. I just don't see how you can do that without having mental health training. So that's one of the things I think should absolutely be happening. And then, like I said, there's some really good projects going out. The mental health teams that are connected to schools that are part of the NHS trusts, mental health hubs, early support hubs, all these things, absolutely fantastic. But it needs better backing, it needs better support, it needs far, far, far more ambitious goals than it's given. There's a you know when you get into the whole emergency services thing, I think it needs a very, very fine look at the policy involved around mental health calls and mental health cases. Same with emergency departments. So much there is, so much. But what above all, I think what would change this is government ministers that talk about mental health because they want to find a solution, not talking about it because they want to appear like they're doing the best they can. And there is a huge difference. Actually investing your time to help is very, very different to investing your time in looking like you're helping. And it's very obvious which one is being used at the moment. And that's what I will say there. But there are people in government that are fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I'm meeting one of them soon in Parliament. You know, some of these politicians are fantastic. And unfortunately, over the last few weeks and months, they've been given a sort of bad name. Some of them are so committed to helping other people, it is unreal. And we just need them to be up front center, yeah, trying to find the solutions because they find solutions absolutely regardless of their own life and their own position and themselves. They put the responsibility of their job beyond themselves. And I think that's incredibly commendable. And we need far more politicians like that. But there's lots of things that need to change, a lot.
So let's just, before we wrap up, I want to drill down into what somebody as an individual can do if they're watching or listening to this and they're struggling right now, whether they're struggling because they've had the realization that things are just a little bit difficult right now and they might struggle to get out of bed or whatever it might be, or they're really close to the point where they feel like this is a big challenge. I realized during my conversation with Patrick Foster that I keep referencing that we spoke for an hour about gambling addiction, and I didn't know what that episode was going to go on to do, but it's had, 10,000 plus views in a couple of months on YouTube, and just a tidal wave of comments of people who have found solace in that video and turned to it for assistance. And I didn't offer the assistance in that video, right? And I'm not saying that I could fix the problem, but I didn't even signpost. There was no like, go and do this next. If somebody's watching this and this video for them is that moment where they're like, yeah, actually, although I haven't spoken to anyone that I know, maybe I want to start exploring the routes open to me. Do you have any signposting?
Oh yeah, you've come to the right place for signposting. Look, I think absolute best thing you can do. I know we've sort of, oh, let's talk about mental health. I know we've talked about that a lot and the complications of that. It is really, really important that you do talk. And if you're struggling, it's very, very important that you reach out to someone. Obviously, I'm coming from an angle that more people should be reaching out to you before you're, having to talk to someone. But if you're struggling, I cannot even begin to tell you the relief, the immediate release, the relief you get when you first console in someone and confide in someone and actually talk to them about it. Like it's immediate, the relief. Um, have that conversation. In terms of where to go for actual support, again, we talk about the NHS and all of this stuff. The NHS is there. We've got a mental health service that is there to help, and they do help people. There are some incredible stories from the mental health service that don't get talked about enough. There are some incredible individuals that work in them that work incredibly hard to help people. Go to your GP, have that conversation with them. GPs talk about mental health all day, every day. It's one of the most common things they'll talk about. They are not going to be put off or scared, or in most cases, they're not going to be awkward. You coming in and saying, I think I might have depression. This is how I've been feeling. That's something they are very, very good at dealing with, and being able to then signpost you to NHS support, referrals to private support, get you onto waiting lists, etc. Really important you get that done earlier, because obviously, as we all know, the waiting lists are quite long. Beyond that, though, there is an incredible charity sector in this country that offers support on gambling addiction, that will offer support on trauma therapy, will offer support on grief, will offer support on any issue you could imagine. There is someone out there that specializes in support for it. And trust me, because I've met some very obscure people that specialize in some incredibly obscure things that people go through. There's an incredible website called Hub of Hope. If you type in Hub of Hope into Google and type in your postcode in the UK, it will bring up all of the local services that are available to you. That's NHS and private and charity sectors, and you can click on, you find information. So, say I search my postcode in, and I was going through grief. You can find all the specialised grief counsellors, or if your marriage is breaking down, you have marriage counsellors, couple counsellors, or you go through, or if you been sexually assaulted, there'll be people that specialise in support for people, abuse victims on there. Amazing website. That is my absolute go-to for getting support and finding out what's in your local area. And there is a lot. You'd be surprised by how much there is for a lot of people that talk about it. And also, I'll just say, you're not weak. If you're struggling right now, things are really hard, especially with the cost of living increase, especially with all the stuff that's going on. A lot of pressure on people now. It's very, very easy to look at yourself like a failure. We do that a lot. But there's absolutely nothing stronger than coming through hard times. There's nothing stronger than that. Yeah, you're certainly not weak. And even if you can survive a day when you want to die, that's immense strength and something to be incredibly proud of.
So I want to end with two questions. Let's begin with this one. The journey that you have so far been on, you've encountered a lot of people from all walks of life. What has this journey taught you about other people?
Taught me about other people. Other people are amazing. It's taught me a huge amount about the resilience of the human spirit. Um, I've met people that have had some very, very, very bad stuff happen to them, and they are motivated and they are so determined, and they will probably be suicidal and in a really bad place, but they are just utterly inspiring. Um, and you know this despite this absolute relentless idea in their head of everyone around me is better off if I was dead. But despite that, they continue and see the next day, and they are just determined to get through it. Like, I absolutely, it is unbelievable. And sometimes you will feel like you're not one of those people, and you're not resilient enough, and you'll feel like you're not anything special. like I said, our brains have been around for a very, very long time. We are all 99.9% exactly the same. We are incredible species and incredible individuals. It's taught me a lot about the resilience of the human mind and what we can actually endure. And also, you know what else is how powerful community is. And it's something that I'm seeing a lot now. Is so many people feeling lonely and the stuff that can do to you. We are a sociable animal. We need community and friends. And when you when you build a good community and you have good friends and family that you can trust and people in your life that mean something to you and you can trust, it's incredible seeing that and the power that can have on how you're doing in your entire life. So yeah, I find the whole psychology of human beings absolutely fascinating. But we are strong. We are strong, 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 very, very strong. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're stoic at all. Strong, actually, in my books, means breaking down in front of your colleagues at work, or having the actual strength to be vulnerable. We're incredibly strong.
And so something that strikes me from your journey, and this is kind of where I want to leave things, is you've been incredibly selfless in everything you've done. And it might feel weird to take that praise, but like the evidence is there, right? You've done an incredible amount to create change that will probably outlive you, right? What has it taught you about yourself?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you say I've been selfless. The way I see it, I don't think I am. I wouldn't put it down to some like mission of mine to do something good necessarily. I just think any human being that speaks to someone that I speak to, that meets the friends of a student that's just died and doesn't want to do something, I just don't think you're not human if you don't have a knee-jerk reaction of wanting to help. And I'm just in a position now where I can help, and I love that. But the one thing, the one thing that this has taught me and about myself, or maybe about what life really means, the meaning of life, how deep I know. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, so many people put so much value on money and fame and jobs and cars and houses. You will never find satisfaction in anything like being able to make someone else feel better. And I've just read an incredible book called When Breath Becomes Air that looks at the boundary between life and death and mortality, and about the meaning of life. And one of the absolute takeaways of that, and something I really have put into my life, is at the end, when you're telling your life story, don't discount when you're talking about the stuff that you've done with your life and all the things you've achieved. Don't discount how you made people feel, because actually in life, what's more important than the stuff that you've done is how you've made people feel. And really, for me, that's what I'm going to remember. And I don't care how much money I have or where I live or what I do, as long as you can have an impact positively on the people around you. I think that is an incredible gift to be able to have. So yeah, that's what I've learned. I've learned the meaning of life. How deep to end on.
Amazing. Ben West, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. I'm going to make sure that your book, this book could save your life, Breaking the Silence Around the Mental Health Emergency, is linked in the show notes below alongside those links that you spoke about. If people want to go elsewhere to find you whilst they're waiting for their book to arrive, because I hope they order it because it's incredible, where else can they go on the internet to find you?
They can find me on the internet on all of the socials. My at is at I am Ben West. I'm everywhere. If you look, I'll be there probably.
Amazing. Thank you so much.